I have kept the minutes of the Sovereignty Commission for 11 years. I have transcribed ultimatums delivered in 4 languages, recorded the silence after declarations of war, noted the exact moment when a chamber full of the most powerful bodies in the known systems understood that something had changed irrevocably, and that they were the last to know. I am not paid to have opinions. I am paid to write down what is said. What I write down on the day I am about to describe runs to 47 pages of transcript. The Commission's side, that is. The human delegation's contribution runs to a single line, 1 word, technically, though I logged the pause before it as its own entry, because it was the kind of pause that does work. I should explain what the Sovereignty Commission is, for anyone who has not had occasion to stand inside that chamber and feel the air pressure of it. It is not the Council proper. It is the body that governs access to relay corridors, to berthing rights, to commercial transit lanes, to the jurisdictional seams between member territories, where the rules are thin and the opportunities, if you know where to look, are considerable. 9 member species hold permanent seats. They rotate the chair on a 17-cycle schedule. On the day in question, the chair belonged to the Vareth Compact, which meant that First Assessor Orun chaired, and Orun is the kind of official who uses the word irregularity the way other beings use a blade, slowly, precisely, watching to see where it goes in. Humanity had been granted associate access to the Commission's jurisdictional framework 9 years prior, not membership, associate access, which is a carefully diminished thing. It meant that human vessels could transit designated corridors. It meant that human commercial agents could apply for berthing at 12 designated relay stations. It meant that human diplomatic staff could request observer status at Commission sessions, which is another carefully diminished thing. Observer status means you sit in the gallery, you do not speak unless spoken to, and the transcript records you as present rather than as a participant. What it did not mean, what it had never been written to mean, because no one on the Commission had thought it necessary to specify, was any limitation on what humanity could do with the corridors it transited, or with the relay stations where it berthed, or with the jurisdictional seams it passed through in the ordinary course of associate access, 9 years running. That was the irregularity. It came to the Commission's attention not through any human declaration or provocation, but through the Vareth Compact's own infrastructure survey, a routine mapping of load distribution across the relay network, which returned numbers that did not correspond to the Commission's asset ledger. Nodes in 6 designated corridors flagged as active but unregistered. Supply caches at 4 berthing stations exceeding any commercial footprint humanity was supposed to maintain. Emergency docking bays along the outer seam of the Karath Passage, constructed, permitted locally, and never reported to the Commission, because the framework required reporting of permanent installations, and these had been registered as temporary structures, renewed on rolling permits, for 7 years. None of it was in violation of any clause in the Associate Access Agreement. I checked. I pulled the agreement from the archive myself, that morning, because I could see where the session was heading, and I wanted to know what I was transcribing. I read it 3 times. Every node, every cache, every docking bay had been built in a space the agreement either permitted or did not address. Associate access to a corridor implies transit. It does not specify what you may leave along the route. The Commission did not discover this all at once. They discovered it the way you discover water damage. You see one stain, and then someone pulls the wall apart, and the scope becomes apparent by degrees. The first hour was almost procedural, Orun walking through the survey discrepancies with the infrastructure auditor. The second hour was when the scope began to register, and the tone changed. By the third hour, when the full inventory, 6 corridor systems, 12 stations, a web of relay nodes and caches, and temporary permanent docking bays, that together constituted a shadow logistics network threaded through the Commission's own framework, had been laid across the display table, the chamber had gone a particular kind of quiet that I had not heard before. It was not the quiet of shock, it was the quiet of calculation, of 9 permanent seat holders looking at a map and understanding simultaneously what that map meant. It meant that any interdiction of human transit through Commission space would now require the Commission to physically dismantle infrastructure embedded in its own relay network. It meant that the 12 designated berthing stations already had human supply capacity that was not dependent on Commission provisioning. It meant that the emergency docking bays along the Kareth Passage outer seam could sustain a human presence in that corridor without a single resupply from Commission-controlled space. It meant that associate access, as a mechanism for keeping humanity at arm's length, had been used for 9 years as a mechanism for something else entirely. Oruen called a formal recess at the end of the 3rd hour. When the session reconvened, the human delegation had been moved from the observer gallery, present, not participant, to the floor. This was irregular in itself. Moving an observer delegation to the floor requires a unanimous procedural vote, and the Commission passed it in 40 seconds, which tells you something about the mood. Senior Envoy Carla Vey sat at the end of the floor table. She had been in the gallery for the entire 3-hour session. She had not spoken. She had not reacted, as far as I could see from my position at the clerk station, to anything that had been displayed or said. She had a notepad in front of her, actual paper, which humans seem to use at moments of deliberate emphasis, and she had written nothing on it. Oru did not offer a preamble. The first assessor is not a being given to softening. The question was direct. The Commission required a formal accounting of every installation, cache, and structure built by human contractors or human commercial entities within the Commission's access framework, the legal basis for each, and the intended purpose. That was the demand. Vey looked at the notepad. She had not looked at it during the 3 hours in the gallery. Looking at it now was a choice, and I noted it in the transcript as a deliberate pause of 6 seconds, because I have learned that the seconds before a human says something worth remembering are part of the record. She looked up. She said, "Compliant." One word, past tense, passive construction. Not, "We are in compliance," which would be an argument. Not, "We have complied," which would be a claim. Compliant. A status report. A fact filed. The kind of word you write at the bottom of an inspection form when the inspection is over and there is nothing to flag. Then she placed her pen on the notepad. Not a dramatic gesture, just setting it down the way you set something down when you are finished with it, and she waited. The Commission did not adjourn quickly. There were 4 more hours of session after that word, 4 hours in which the Commission's legal staff was summoned and the Associate Access Agreement was read aloud in full, and every installation was cross-referenced against every clause. And at the end of it, the conclusion that I had reached by myself that morning, reading the agreement in the archive, was the conclusion that the Commission reached collectively at the floor table. There was no violation, not of any written clause, not of any recorded understanding, not of any annex or codicil or supplementary protocol, because the agreement had been written by the Commission's own legal staff 9 years prior, and they had written it to govern what humanity could do in Commission space, and they had not thought it necessary to specify what humanity could not do, because associate members did not do things of this kind. Vey and the delegation left before the final procedural close. They did not request a formal departure. They simply stood, gathered their materials, and walked out through the floor entrance, the same way they had come in. I noted the time, the 47th page of transcript. Below it I wrote, in the notes column, what I always write when a delegation exits before close: departed, session ongoing. I have thought about that word many times since. Not what it meant legally. The legal analysis was completed within the month, and it said exactly what the agreement said, which was nothing prohibitory. I mean what it meant as a communication. What Vey chose to say, and what she chose not to say, when the most powerful access governance body in 4-star systems demanded she account for herself. She did not explain. She did not defend. She did not outline the 9-year strategy. or name the individuals who had managed the rolling permits, or describe what the network was for. She said the one word that closed the question, because the question had only one accurate answer, and she knew it, and she knew they knew it. And saying anything beyond that word would have been, in its own way, a concession, an acknowledgement that some justification was owed. The Commission's framework had opened a door. The word compliant was just the door swinging shut. I wrote it down. That is my job, but I kept a copy for myself, which is not strictly my job, and I have looked at it on the days when I needed to remember that the most devastating thing you can say to a body that believed it, held all the leverage, is the word that confirms it never did.